A cleaning lady said to a millionaire, "Sir, my mother has a medal just like yours." When the millionaire asked what her mother's name was, everything changed. The sound of knocks on the door invaded the small apartment like thunder on a morning that should have been silent, making Margaret wake up startled from a restless sleep that had barely begun after spending the night caring for her mother. Her eyes burned from lack of proper rest, and her entire body ached from the accumulated tension of the past few days, trying to manage the little money she had between food and medicine, an impossible choice that no daughter should have to make. The knocks continued, increasingly stronger and more insistent, reverberating through the thin walls of the rented apartment where they had lived for 15 years, the only home she had known since her father had left. She got up staggering, her bare feet touching the cold floor as she crossed the small living room toward the door, her heart already racing, sensing that those knocks at 6 in the morning could only mean trouble. Through the peephole, she saw a man in a dark suit holding a folder of documents, and beside him 2 uniformed police officers who seemed bored with another morning of thankless work. "Open the door. Court officer." "I know someone's in there. You better open up before we have to use force," shouted the man outside with an authoritative voice. Margaret took a deep breath, trying to calm the tremor in her hands. Margaret unlocked the 3 padlocks she had installed after someone tried to break into the neighbor's apartment the month before, her hands trembling not from fear, but from a deep exhaustion that penetrated to the bone. The court officer was a middle-aged man with a face marked by expression lines that betrayed years of carrying bad news to desperate people, and his eyes avoided making direct contact as he extended the brown envelope with the court seal. "Margaret Whitfield?" he asked in a professional tone while checking the data on his clipboard, and when she nodded affirmatively, he continued in a mechanical voice like someone reciting a memorized text. "I'm here to deliver an eviction order. You have 48 hours to vacate the property. 3 months of rent in arrears. The landlady filed a lawsuit and won. Sign here confirming receipt," he said, extending the clipboard with the form. She took the document with fingers that seemed not to belong to her, her mind still trying to process what was happening, while her eyes quickly scanned the words printed in cold and impersonal font. The paper trembled in her hands as she tried to find strength to fight against that sentence. "Please, sir, I need more time. My mother is very ill and I'm starting a new job today. I'll be able to pay everything," she pleaded with a choked voice. The officer just shook his head negatively. "Miss, there's no use talking to me, I just follow orders. If you want a contest, find a lawyer, but the deadline doesn't change." 48 hours from now," replied the officer as he looked at his watch to mark the exact time of notification. Margaret ran to the kitchen table where she kept an organized folder with all her mother's medical documents, returning with a considerable volume of papers that she spread before the man with desperate gestures. "Look, sir, these are my mother's prescriptions. She has a serious heart condition. She needs continuous medication. The heart medicine costs a fortune. I had to choose between paying rent or buying the medicines. Are you a father? Are you a son? Do you understand what it's like to see your mother suffering and not be able to do anything?" she asked, showing each stamped medical prescription. The police officers at the door glanced at each other uncomfortably, but the officer maintained his professional posture, although something in his eyes softened for a brief moment before hardening again. "I understand your situation, miss. I've seen many like it. But the law is the law. If I don't comply, someone else will come tomorrow and do the same job," he said, returning the documents to her. Margaret felt despair growing in her chest like a wave. "Sir, today I start working at a big company downtown. It's a permanent job. I'll receive my salary on time every month. I can pay everything in installments, make a deal, sign whatever is necessary," insisted Margaret, holding the officer's arm when he made a move to turn away. He stopped and looked at her hand on his arm, not with anger but with the tired sadness of someone who has seen that scene repeat many times, and gently disengaged himself. "Miss, even if you get this job today, even if you receive your salary at the end of the month, the case has already been judged. The landlady lives abroad, and her lawyers don't accept deals. Have you tried?" he asked in a tone that suggested he already knew the answer. Margaret nodded in confirmation, remembering the dozens of unanswered calls and emails she had sent over the past few months trying to negotiate. "Well, they want the property empty to renovate and rent it for triple the price. It's what's happening all over the neighborhood, the officer added. Suddenly, the sound of a weak, persistent cough echoed from the room at the end of the hallway. "My daughter, water, please," called the weak voice of Mrs. Eleanor. Margaret looked desperately between the officer and the hallway. "Go take care of your mother, young lady. I've done my job here." 48 hours, not a minute more," said the officer, as he put the clipboard in his briefcase and prepared to leave. Margaret wanted to scream, wanted to beg one more time, but her mother's cough grew more intense, and she had no choice but to run down the narrow hallway toward the bedroom. Behind her, she heard the door closing and the heavy footsteps descending the building stairs, taking away any hope of mercy. Eleanor's room was immersed in dimness. The curtains closed because strong light bothered her sensitive eyes, and the air had that characteristic smell of a sick room, a mixture of medicines, alcohol, and the lavender perfume that Margaret sprayed to try to ease it. Her mother was lying in bed, her fragile body almost disappearing under the blankets, her pale, thin face framed by white hair that was once black and shiny. "Water, my daughter. My throat is burning," Eleanor asked in a hoarse voice. Margaret took the glass she always kept full on the bedside table and helped her mother sit up. "Slowly, Mom, small sips," she instructed, holding the glass carefully. Eleanor drank with difficulty, each sip seeming like a monumental effort, and when she finished, she leaned back on the pillows, breathing with difficulty as if she had run a marathon. "Who was at the door, dear? I heard raised voices." "Is everything okay?" she asked with that maternal intuition that not even illness could diminish. Margaret hesitated, not wanting to worry her mother with yet another problem, but also unable to lie to those eyes that knew her so well. "It was just a pushy salesman, Mom, nothing important. You need to rest, don't worry about anything," she replied, trying to sound convincing while adjusting the covers. Eleanor held her daughter's hand with surprising strength for someone so debilitated, her eyes searching for the truth in Margaret's face. "You've always been a terrible liar, my child. Your eyes give you away. It was about the rent, wasn't it?" Eleanor asked with deep sadness in her voice. Margaret felt tears beginning to form but held them back. She needed to be strong. "I'll solve everything, Mum. I start my new job today, remember? That big company that called me. Everything will be fine," she said, gently squeezing her mother's hand. Eleanor smiled with sadness and understanding. "My poor daughter, having to carry all this weight alone." "I should be taking care of you, not the other way around," lamented Eleanor, as a tear ran down her face marked by suffering. Margaret sat on the edge of the bed and wiped her mother's tear with infinite care, remembering when she was a child, and Eleanor made the same gesture when she cried after falling or getting hurt while playing. "You took care of me my whole life, Mom. Now it's my turn to give back. Don't worry about anything. I'll figure everything out," she assured, trying to convey a confidence she didn't feel. Eleanor coughed again, this time more forcefully, and Margaret noticed red spots on the handkerchief her mother brought to her mouth, a worrying sign that had been recurring in recent days. "The heart medicine, dear. Did you manage to buy it?" Eleanor asked with difficulty after the coughing fit passed. Margaret felt the weight of guilt crushing her chest as she remembered that the medication had run out 3 days ago and she hadn't been able to gather the money to buy more. "I'll buy it today, Mum, with the advance I'll ask for at the new job," she lied, knowing that she would hardly get an advance on her first day. Eleanor closed her eyes as if she knew about the lie, but preferred to accept the comfort it offered. The silence that followed was heavy, loaded with unspoken words and concerns shared silently between mother and daughter, who knew each other too well to need to verbalize their fears. Margaret stood up to open the curtain a bit and let in the soft morning light, hoping that this might improve her mother's spirits a little when her alarm clock rang in the next room, reminding her that she needed to get ready for work. "I need to prepare, Mom. I'll make some tea and leave some toast for you before I leave," she said, heading for the door. Eleanor weakly waved, her eyes following her daughter with an expression that Margaret couldn't fully decipher, something between pride, love, and a deep sadness. "Daughter, wait a moment," Eleanor called when Margaret was almost leaving the room. "Yes, Mother," she responded, quickly returning to the bedside. Eleanor pointed to the top of the wardrobe, where an old wooden box was partially visible among other dusty objects. "That box. If you need money, you can sell it." There are some old things inside that might be worth something, Eleanor said in a weak voice. Margaret looked at the box with curiosity, but shook her head negatively. I won't sell your memories, Mother. I know that box is important to you. You've always kept it with such care, protested Margaret, gently touching her mother's face. Eleanor held her hand and squeezed it with what little strength she had, her eyes filling with tears she didn't try to hide. Nothing is more important than you being well, my daughter. Promise me you'll do whatever is necessary to be okay, even if I... Eleanor didn't complete the sentence, but the meaning hung in the air. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. She didn't like when her mother talked like this, as if she were preparing for something inevitable. You're going to get better, Mother. We'll overcome this together like we always have, she insisted with determination. Eleanor smiled weakly. That kind of smile parents give their children when they want to protect them from painful truths. You are so strong, my girl, stronger than you imagine. Your father would be so proud, murmured Eleanor. The alarm clock rang again, more insistently, and Margaret knew she needed to go or she would miss the only chance to save them both. I'll prepare your breakfast and be right back, said Margaret, hurrying to the kitchen where she quickly prepared a weak tea and some toast with the little butter that still remained in the nearly empty refrigerator. Her hands worked automatically, while her mind calculated how much time she had to reach the city centre, using public transportation since she had no money for a taxi. She returned to the room with the tray and found Eleanor with her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and irregular, which worried her even more. Mother, I brought your breakfast, she announced, placing the tray on the bedside table. Eleanor opened her eyes with difficulty and tried to smile, but the effort seemed to drain her few remaining energies even more. Thank you, my daughter. You're always taking care of me, she thanked with an almost inaudible voice. Margaret helped her mother take a few sips of tea, noticing how her hands trembled and how each movement seemed to cause pain. I need to go, Mother, but I'll be back at lunchtime to see how you are, she promised. Eleanor nodded in understanding, her eyes already closing again. Margaret ran to her room and quickly put on the only outfit that could be considered appropriate for a corporate environment, a simple black skirt and a white blouse that she had washed the night before and that was still slightly damp. She looked at herself in the cracked bathroom mirror and tried to arrange her hair in the best possible way, tying it in a bun that she hoped would look professional. Her hands trembled as she applied her only lipstick, a light pink almost finished that she had bought on sale months ago. She returned to her mother's room to say goodbye and found her in a state that alarmed her even more. Her breathing was more difficult, and there was a greyish tone to her skin that wasn't there minutes before. Mother, are you all right? She asked, kneeling beside the bed. Eleanor opened her eyes with effort and extended a trembling hand to touch her daughter's face. You look beautiful, my daughter. You'll do very well in your new job, she said in a thread of a voice. Margaret held her mother's hand between hers, noticing how cold it was despite the day already warming up. Maybe I should stay, Mother. I can call the company and explain. Try to reschedule for tomorrow, suggested Margaret, torn between the duty to care for her mother and the desperate need for the job. Eleanor shook her head vehemently, using her last strength to be emphatic about this. No, you need to go. This job is our salvation. Go and show them what an incredible woman you are, Eleanor insisted with determination. Margaret leaned in and kissed her mother's forehead, feeling the feverish heat of her skin against her lips, a disturbing contrast to the cold hands. I'll be back soon, Mother. Rest and try to eat something, she asked, forcing herself to stand. Eleanor held her hand for another moment, her eyes conveying something that Margaret couldn't fully understand at that moment. Maria, my dear daughter, I want you to know that you were the best thing that happened in my life, said Eleanor, with tears streaming down her face. Margaret felt her heart tighten with those words that sounded like a farewell. Mother, please don't talk like that. I'll be back in a few hours and we'll talk plenty, responded Margaret, trying to keep her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Eleanor continued holding her hand, the strength of her grip contrasting with the fragility of her body, as if she were using all the energy she had left in that gesture. Listen, my daughter, I need to tell you some important things, Eleanor began with urgency in her voice. Margaret looked at the clock on the wall and saw that it was getting dangerously late, but she couldn't simply leave with her mother in that state. Mum, we can talk when I get back, she tried once more. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes shining with an intensity that Margaret hadn't seen in a long time. "No, it has to be now. I feel that. I feel that I won't have another chance," Eleanor insisted. Margaret felt tears beginning to fall, no longer able to contain them in the face of the terrible premonition taking hold of her heart. "You will have many chances, Mom, many," she said between contained sobs. Eleanor raised her trembling hand and wiped her daughter's tears with a gesture so familiar and affectionate that it made Margaret cry even more. "Don't cry, my daughter. You need to be strong now." "You've always been strong, even when you were little and we lost your father," said Eleanor with an increasingly weak voice. Margaret remembered those terrible days after the accident that took her father, how her mother had been her pillar, even while being destroyed inside. "You were strong too, Mum, the strongest of all," she replied, squeezing Eleanor's hand. Eleanor's breathing became more irregular, and she closed her eyes for a moment as if gathering strength to continue. "There's so much I wanted to have done differently, so much I wanted to have given you," she murmured. Margaret shook her head vehemently, not wanting to hear regrets when there was nothing to regret. "You gave me everything, Mum. Love, care, education, everything that matters," she affirmed with conviction. Eleanor smiled weakly, that smile that lit up her face even in illness. "You always knew how to say the right words, my daughter. Just like your father," said Eleanor with nostalgia in her voice. Margaret noticed that her mother's breathing was becoming more labored, each inhalation seeming like a struggle against her own failing body. "Mom, I'm going to call an ambulance," she decided, picking up the phone, but Eleanor held her arm with surprising strength. "No, daughter. Without the medications, it's no use, and we can't afford the hospital," Eleanor said with painful lucidity. Margaret knew she was right, but refused to accept the helplessness of the situation. "Then I'll stay, the job can wait," she declared, putting down her bag. Eleanor became agitated at this, trying to sit up in bed despite her extreme weakness. "No! You need to go, it's our only chance," she exclaimed before being seized by another coughing fit. Margaret helped her lie down again, panic growing as she saw more blood on the handkerchief. "All right, Mom, I'll go. But first let me at least change this water and check if everything is okay," she negotiated. While Margaret changed the water in the glass and adjusted the pillows to make her mother more comfortable, Eleanor watched her with eyes that seemed to want to memorize every detail of her daughter's face. "You look so much like him, you know? Your father. The same determined look, the same stubbornness in never giving up," commented Eleanor with a dreamy voice. Margaret stopped what she was doing and sat on the edge of the bed, realizing that perhaps she needed these moments as much as her mother did. "Tell me more about him, Mum. I was so little when he died," she asked, momentarily forgetting her hurry. Eleanor smiled with eyes lost in distant memories, her hand seeking her daughter's. "He was a good man, hard-working, honest. Perhaps too honest for this world," she said with a touch of bitterness. Margaret squeezed her mother's hand, encouraging her to continue. "He had big dreams for you. Wanted you to study, to have opportunities that we never had," Eleanor continued. The clock on the wall marked time passing mercilessly. "And you, Mum? What were your dreams?" asked Margaret, realizing she had never asked this question before. Eleanor was silent for a moment, her eyes filling with tears that slowly ran down her pale, thin face. "My dream was to see you happy, fulfilled, with a better life than ours. It seems I failed at that too," she responded with deep sadness. Margaret felt her heart break hearing those words, her mother carrying guilt for circumstances that were beyond her control. "You never failed me, Mother. Never. I am who I am because of you," she stated vehemently. Eleanor tried to respond, but was interrupted by another coughing fit, this time more violent, her fragile body shaking with the effort. Margaret supported her, feeling how light her mother had become, as if life was slowly escaping from her. "Mother, breathe slowly. Try to calm down," she instructed, trying to control her own panic. When the fit passed, Eleanor was even paler, a layer of cold sweat covering her forehead. "Daughter, I need you to promise me something," Eleanor asked with a voice so weak that Margaret had to lean in to hear. "Anything, Mother," she responded promptly. Eleanor gathered her strength and looked directly into her daughter's eyes with an intensity that surprised her. "Promise that you will live, not just survive. Promise that you will seek happiness, that you will allow yourself to dream even when it seems impossible, Eleanor asked with urgency. Margaret nodded, tears making it difficult to see her mother's face. I promise, Mother, she said with a choked voice. Eleanor visibly relaxed as if that promise had lifted a weight from her shoulders. And about that box, Eleanor began, pointing weakly to the wardrobe. Margaret gently interrupted her, not wanting her mother to waste energy on this. Don't worry about the box now, Mother. When I come back, we'll talk about it, she said. Eleanor shook her head in frustration. No, it's important. Your father. He wanted you to know. About your past, she insisted with increasing difficulty forming words. Mother, please, rest. We have time for these conversations, Margaret begged, although something inside her whispered that time was exactly what they didn't have. Eleanor held her daughter's hand with renewed strength, her eyes conveying a desperate urgency that made Margaret stop protesting. Listen carefully, my daughter. In that box are things from your father, things he kept before he died. Documents, photographs, a letter. Eleanor paused to catch her breath, each word costing a visible effort. Margaret waited patiently, realizing this was too important to her mother to be postponed. A letter for me? She asked. Eleanor confirmed with a nod, her eyes filling with tears again. For you to read when he departed. I think I let too much time pass. Now I'm the one departing, Eleanor completed. Margaret felt a chill down her spine at those words, the reality of the situation hitting her like a punch to the stomach. Mother, don't talk like that, please, she pleaded. Eleanor squeezed her hand affectionately. We need to accept reality, my daughter. Without the medication, my heart is failing. I can feel it, Eleanor said with a calmness that was more frightening than any cry of despair. Margaret wanted to deny it, wanted to scream that she would find a solution, but the words died in her throat when she saw the seriousness on her mother's face. I'll get the money today, Mother. I'll convince them to give me an advance, she promised once more. Eleanor smiled tenderly as if she knew it was an impossible promise, but appreciated the effort. You've always been my warrior, since you were little. Remember when you were 5 and said you would work to buy medicine when I first got sick? Eleanor reminisced nostalgically. Margaret vaguely remembered, but the memory was intertwined with so many others of hardship and overcoming. You got better that time, you'll get better this time too, she stated, trying to believe her own words. The clock showed she was already hopelessly late, but how could she leave her mother like this? Eleanor noticed her daughter's glance at the clock and made an effort to appear stronger than she was. Go, my daughter. Go win that job. Show them the wonderful woman you are, she encouraged, trying to smile. Margaret hesitated, torn between filial duty and practical necessity, her heart being pulled in two opposite directions. I can't leave you like this, Mother, she confessed. Eleanor gathered her last strength and spoke with surprising firmness. Margaret Whitfield, you will stand up now, take your purse and go to that job. That's an order, she said with a flash of maternal authority from days past. Margaret almost smiled at her mother's determination. So even on the brink of death, she continued trying to care for her daughter. All right, Mother, I'll go, but I'll come running back at lunchtime, she agreed, reluctantly getting up. Eleanor nodded in approval, her eyes following each of her daughter's movements as she picked up her purse. Wait, Eleanor called when Margaret was at the bedroom door. Yes, Mother, she answered, quickly returning. Eleanor extended her arms, asking for a hug, and Margaret carefully leaned in to embrace her mother's fragile body, feeling the bones beneath the thin skin, the heart beating irregularly against her chest. I love you so much, my daughter. More than words can express, Eleanor whispered in her ear. Margaret felt the tears return with full force, wetting her mother's shoulder as they embraced. I love you too, Mother. More than anything in this world, she responded, her voice choked. They remained like this for long moments, mother and daughter united in an embrace that both knew deep in their hearts could be the last. Eleanor was the first to pull away, wiping her daughter's tears with trembling fingers. Now go. And remember, head high, shoulders back, you're a Whitfield, we have pride and dignity, she instructed. Margaret nodded, straightening her posture. I'll make you proud, Mother, Margaret promised at the door. Eleanor smiled, that smile full of love that Margaret would carry forever in her memory. You already do, my daughter. Every day, Eleanor replied. Margaret took one last look at her mother, memorizing every detail of her face, the way the morning light created a soft aura around her white hair. "See you soon, Mother," she said, forcing an optimistic tone. "See you soon, my love," Eleanor replied, waving weakly. Margaret left the room and quickly crossed the apartment before she lost the courage to go. When she reached the front door, she paused for a moment, a terrible premonition tightening her heart. She ran back to the bedroom and found Eleanor with her eyes closed, her breathing almost imperceptible. "Mother," she called softly. Eleanor opened her eyes with difficulty and smiled upon seeing her daughter. "Still here? You'll be late," she said in an almost inaudible voice. "I just wanted to make sure you're okay," Margaret explained, approaching the bed again. Eleanor extended her hand and Margaret took it, feeling how cold it was, as if life was escaping through her fingers. "Daughter, whatever happens, know that my life was worthwhile because I had you," said Eleanor with visible effort. Margaret squeezed her mother's hand, the words sounding even more like a farewell. "Mother, please, hold on, I'll be back soon with your medicine," she begged. Eleanor just smiled, that serene smile of someone who has already accepted her fate. "Go with God, my daughter," she murmured. Margaret kissed her mother's forehead once more, feeling the cold, damp skin beneath her lips. "See you soon, Mother." "Hold on," she asked before leaving the room. She crossed the apartment almost running, tears clouding her vision, the bad feeling growing with each step. She stopped at the door one more time, something inside her screaming to go back. Margaret ran back to the bedroom, the bad feeling transforming into terrible certainty when she saw her mother motionless on the bed, eyes open staring at the ceiling unseeing, the hand that seconds before held hers now fallen inert on the white sheet. Time seemed to stop at that moment, the world around disappearing as she processed the scene before her eyes, her brain refusing to accept what her heart already knew. She approached slowly, as if any sudden movement could break a spell, and touched Eleanor's face, feeling the skin already beginning to cool under her trembling fingers. Her mother's lips were parted as if she had tried to say something more, and that serene half-smile was still frozen on her face. But there was no longer the gentle movement of her chest rising and falling, no longer the weak but constant sound of difficult breathing. "Mother," she called in a small childlike voice, as if she were a child lost in the dark calling for the only person who could save her. Eleanor didn't respond. Her eyes continued to stare into infinity, and it was then that reality hit Margaret with the force of a runaway train. "Mother! Mother!" she screamed, gently shaking Eleanor's shoulders. Silence was her only answer. Without thinking, operating only on instinct and desperation, Margaret climbed onto the bed and positioned her hands on her mother's chest, beginning the cardiac compressions she had learned in a free course years ago, never imagining that one day she would need to use them on her own mother. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, she counted aloud as she pressed hard, feeling Eleanor's fragile ribs giving way beneath her hands, the sound making her stomach turn, but she couldn't stop, couldn't give up. With one hand she continued the compressions, while with the other she picked up the phone on the nightstand, dialing the emergency number with fingers that trembled so much that she missed twice before succeeding. "Emergency, please. My mother stopped breathing. She has a heart condition and has been without her medication for days," she screamed into the phone when they finally answered, her voice breaking into desperate sobs. The operator on the other end maintained professional calm, asking for the address and instructing Margaret to continue compressions until the ambulance arrived. "Don't stop the compressions, ma'am. 30 compressions, 2 breaths. The ambulance is on its way," the calm voice instructed. Margaret put the phone on speaker and continued. 26, 27, 28, 29, 30, she counted, before tilting Eleanor's head back and sealing her lips over her mother's, blowing air into her inert lungs, the bitter taste of death already present, but she refused to acknowledge it. She immediately returned to compressions, sweat running down her face and mixing with tears as she worked frantically to bring her mother back. "Please, Mum, come back to me. Don't leave me alone, please," she begged between counts, her voice hoarse from effort and emotion. Her arms began to ache, muscles protesting against the repetitive effort, but she couldn't stop. Every second without oxygen to the brain could be fatal. Every moment of hesitation could mean the difference between life and death. Time dragged on, each minute seeming like an eternity, as she continued the endless cycle of compressions and breaths, the room spinning around her from exhaustion and panic. "Where is that ambulance?" she shouted at the phone. The operator responded they were 3 minutes away. The sound of distant sirens made Margaret's heart leap with hope, and she redoubled her efforts, pressing Eleanor's chest with renewed strength, even as her arms were burning like fire. "They're coming, Mum. Hold on, they're going to save you," she said more to herself than to Eleanor, who remained motionless under her hands. The sirens grew louder, closer, and then she heard heavy footsteps running up the stairs, professional voices shouting instructions to each other. The apartment door, which she had left open in her desperation, was invaded by 2 paramedics carrying heavy equipment, their faces serious and focused as they assessed the situation in seconds. "How long has she been like this?" asked the first paramedic, a young man with steady hands who gently moved Margaret aside to take over the compressions. 5 minutes, maybe 6. I was leaving for work and came back." "She wasn't breathing," Margaret replied, stepping back to make room but unable to take her eyes off her mother. The second paramedic, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, was already preparing the defibrillator. "Step back, please," she ordered. Margaret obeyed, hugging herself as she watched. The sound of the defibrillator charging filled the room, that high-pitched whine she only knew from movies and TV shows, but which was now terribly real and would determine her mother's future. "Administering shock. Everyone clear," announced the female paramedic before pressing the pads against Eleanor's chest, her fragile body arching with the electrical discharge in a way that made Margaret sob loudly. They checked for a pulse, exchanged quick professional glances, and the man returned to compressions while the woman prepared medications. "Adrenaline, 1 milligram, she said as she injected the substance directly into Eleanor's vein. Margaret watched everything as if she were outside her own body, floating above the scene and watching these strangers try to save the most important person in her life. "Let's try once more," said the paramedic after another cycle of compressions. The defibrillator was charged again. The shock applied, and this time Margaret saw something that made her heart almost stop too. A small movement on the portable monitor they had connected. "We have a pulse. Weak, but it's there," announced the woman. Margaret almost fell to her knees with relief. "She's coming back, but the situation is critical." "We need to take her immediately," informed the male paramedic, as they quickly transferred Eleanor to the stretcher, connecting her to a portable respirator and keeping the cardiac monitor running. Margaret automatically grabbed her purse and followed the stretcher down the narrow stairs of the building, holding her mother's cold hand while the paramedics carefully maneuvered to avoid destabilizing the equipment. The ambulance was parked in front of the building with its lights flashing, attracting the curious attention of neighbors who had come out to see what was happening. As they loaded Eleanor into the ambulance, the paramedic looked at Margaret with professional but also human understanding. "Are you coming with us?" he asked. Margaret looked at the clock. 8:20 in the morning. She was already desperately late, but there was no choice. "Yes, I'll go," she decided, climbing into the ambulance. During the turbulent journey through the city streets, the paramedic constantly monitored Eleanor's vital signs. "She's stable for now, but her heart is very weak. She needs urgent medication," she informed. Margaret nodded, terror growing as she thought about the costs. They arrived at Central Hospital amid a controlled confusion of urgency, and Margaret ran alongside the stretcher to the emergency doors, where a nurse gently but firmly stopped her. "You need to wait here while we stabilize her. I'll need some information," the nurse said. Margaret watched helplessly as they took her mother inside, then mechanically answered questions about medical history, medications, health insurance, the latter making her stomach sink when she had to admit they didn't have any. The nurse wrote everything down without judgment, but Margaret saw the look of understanding and pity that quickly passed across her face. After filling out the necessary forms, she was directed to the waiting room, that hospital limbo where time seemed to both drag and rush simultaneously. 40 minutes passed before a doctor appeared, his stained white coat indicating he had been working intensely. "Family of Eleanor Whitfield?" he called. Margaret practically jumped from her chair, rushing toward him. "I'm her daughter. How is she?" she asked with a trembling voice. Your mother is stable for now. We managed to regularize her heart rhythm and she's responding to basic treatment, began the doctor, a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes. But I need to be honest. Without specific heart medications, it's a temporary situation. She needs expensive medicines and continuous treatment, or... He didn't complete the sentence, but the meaning was clear. Margaret felt the tears returning, the helplessness of the situation crushing her. How long does she have without the medications? She asked in a small voice. The doctor sighed before answering. A few days, maybe a week if we're lucky. With proper treatment, she could still live for years, he explained. Margaret nodded, processing the information while making the most difficult decision of her life. Can I see her? She asked. The doctor nodded and led her to the ICU, where Eleanor was sedated, surrounded by machines and tubes. She'll sleep for the next few hours. It's better this way for the heart to rest, he informed before walking away. Margaret held her mother's hand and whispered, I'll get the money, Mum, I'll get that job, hang in there. She stayed a few more minutes before gathering the courage to leave. Outside the hospital, the morning sun seemed to mock her desperation, bright and cheerful while her world was falling apart. Margaret took her cell phone and called the company, knowing she had probably already lost the position, but needing to try. The receptionist answered with a professional and cold voice. Thornton Corporation's good morning, she said. Margaret explained who she was and about the medical emergency, begging for a chance to explain in person. Miss Whitfield, you are 2 hours late. The supervisor said your position has been cancelled, the receptionist informed without emotion. Margaret felt desperation growing but couldn't give up. Please, I need to speak with someone. My mother almost died this morning. She's in the ICU and needs expensive medications. I beg you, let me explain in person, she pleaded. There was a pause on the other end, and then the receptionist sighed. Look, I can't promise anything, but if you come now, maybe Mrs. Beatrice might still be willing to listen, she said with a touch of compassion. Margaret thanked her profusely and ran to catch the bus. The journey to downtown seemed endless, each bus stop a torture as she mentally calculated how much time she had before it was too late. When she finally arrived at the imposing glass and steel building, it was almost 10 in the morning. She ran in, still in wrinkled clothes stained from the morning's efforts, her hair disheveled and eyes red from crying. The receptionist looked at her with a mixture of pity and disapproval. 7th floor, General Services Department. But I'm not sure if Mrs. Beatrice will want to see you, she warned, handing her a visitor badge. Margaret thanked her and ran to the elevator, every second counting against her. When the doors opened on the 7th floor, she could hear raised voices coming from a room at the end of the corridor. Taking a deep breath, she knocked on the door and entered when she heard an irritated, "Come in." The scene that awaited her was worse than she had imagined. Mrs. Beatrice was there, along with other cleaning staff and what appeared to be someone from HR. "Ah, finally decided to show up," said Mrs. Beatrice with cutting sarcasm. All heads turned to look at her. "Mrs. Beatrice, please let me explain. My mother had a heart attack this morning. I was performing CPR, waiting for the ambulance. She's in the ICU now," Margaret explained quickly, the words tumbling out in her desperation. Mrs. Beatrice crossed her arms, her face a mask of disbelief and disdain. "First day and already arriving with elaborate excuses? Do you know how many times I've heard that story?" She questioned loudly for everyone to hear. The other employees lowered their heads, clearly uncomfortable with the public humiliation, but without the courage to intervene. Margaret felt her face burn with shame, but she couldn't give up. "It's true, Ma'am. I have the medical report here, the hospital number. Please, I can prove it," she insisted, searching for the paper in her purse with trembling hands. "Mrs." Beatrice made a dismissive gesture with her hand. "I'm not interested in seeing papers that anyone can falsify. What interests me is punctuality and commitment," she said coldly. The HR man cleared his throat and consulted his clipboard. "Miss Whitfield, our records show that you were notified about the importance of punctuality during the selection process. You signed a form agreeing to immediate dismissal in case of tardiness during the probationary period," he said in a bureaucratic tone. Margaret felt her legs weaken but remained standing, desperation giving way to a determination born of absolute necessity. "I know, sir, and I take full responsibility, but please, my mother needs expensive heart medication. With the company's health insurance, I could save her. Without it, she has days to live. I'll do anything. Work overtime without pay, clean the worst places, anything, she begged, pride completely forgotten in the face of her mother's life. Mrs. Beatrice laughed, a cruel sound that echoed through the room. Did you hear that? She thinks she deserves special treatment because she has personal problems. As if everyone here didn't have their own difficulties, she said, addressing the other employees. One of them, an older woman, seemed to want to say something, but held back upon receiving a sharp look from the supervisor. It was then that the door opened, and a man entered. Tall, well-dressed, with an air of authority that Margaret recognized as someone from senior management. He was the financial director, as his badge indicated, and he carried a coffee cup and some documents. Beatrice, I need someone to immediately clean the main meeting room. We had an accident with coffee spilled on important documents, he said before noticing Margaret. Who is this? He asked in a disinterested tone. Mrs. Beatrice hurried to explain. The candidate who arrived almost 3 hours late on her first day, Mr. Graham. I was just dismissing her, she informed him with evident satisfaction. Mr. Graham looked Margaret up and down with obvious disdain. 3 hours? That's a record. Let me guess, some sick relative, he asked sarcastically. Margaret tried to respond, but he interrupted her. Always the same story. Sick mother, eviction, child with fever. Don't you have any creativity? Always the same worn-out excuses, he said, laughing. The humiliation was complete and public. The other employees looked at the floor, some with tears in their eyes out of solidarity, but none dared to defend Margaret. Mr. Graham continued his show of cruelty, clearly enjoying the moment. You know what the problem is with people like you? You think the world should stop because of your personal problems. This is a serious company, not a charity institution, he declared. Margaret felt tears running down her face but didn't wipe them away, keeping her gaze fixed on him. My mother is dying, sir. It's not an excuse, it's the truth, she said with a trembling but firm voice. This seemed to irritate him even more. And what does that have to do with me? Go look for help from the government, from NGOs, whatever. Here we need professionals, not charity cases, he responded, turning to leave. That's when Mrs. Beatrice had an idea that clearly amused her. Wait, Mr. Graham, how about we give her a chance, she suggested with a malicious smile. Everyone looked surprised. What do you mean? He asked. Well, Mr. Thornton will make his surprise visit today. He always personally fires someone to set an example, to show that he's attentive to details. Why don't we let her work today? If she survives until the end of the day, she stays. If not. Mrs. Beatrice left the sentence hanging, clearly finding it impossible that Margaret could manage. Mr. Graham laughed, finding the idea amusing. Perfect. Some entertainment for a tedious day. But she cleans his office. One mistake, one stain, one paper out of place, and she's out. Do you accept the challenge? He asked Margaret. She didn't hesitate. It was her only chance. I accept, she replied firmly. Mrs. Beatrice seemed disappointed that she had accepted, hoping she would refuse. Great. Get the uniform and start immediately. And remember, Mr. Thornton has eagle eyes. He notices everything, she warned. Margaret was taken to the locker room, where she received a uniform and quick instructions. Good luck, you'll need it, one of the employees whispered. Margaret thanked her and changed quickly. First assigned to clean the meeting room where the coffee accident had happened, Margaret worked with speed and precision, determined not to give any reason for complaints. The coffee-stained documents had already been removed, but the table was sticky and stained. While cleaning, she heard malicious comments from passing executives, clearly all aware of her situation. That's the one who arrived 3 hours late. I bet she won't last until lunch. Thornton will destroy her. Each word was a stab, but she continued working, thinking of her mother lying in the ICU. After the meeting room, she was sent to clean other offices, always under the vigilant and critical eye of Mrs. Beatrice, who appeared every half hour to look for flaws. You left marks on the glass. This floor isn't shiny enough. Do it all again. Margaret obeyed without complaint, redoing already perfect work just to satisfy the supervisor's sadism. The clock struck noon when she was finally sent to the top floor. Mr. Thornton's office is at the end of the corridor. You have 1 hour to make everything impeccable, and when I say impeccable, I mean perfect. "He has fired people for finding a fingerprint on the glass desk," Mrs. Beatrice instructed with evident pleasure in increasing the pressure. Margaret took her cleaning cart and went up to the top floor, the CEO's territory, where the air seemed thinner and every detail screamed power and wealth. The corridor was silent, with thick carpet that muffled footsteps, and she arrived at the enormous double doors of the main office. Taking a deep breath, she entered and was momentarily paralyzed by the grandeur of the space. It was larger than many apartments, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city, dark wood furniture that certainly cost more than she would earn in years, and art on the walls that she recognized from history books. "Focus, Margaret. For Mother," she said to herself as she began working. Each surface was cleaned with obsessive care, each object replaced exactly where it was. She was polishing the enormous mahogany desk when her cell phone rang. The number was from the hospital, and her heart stopped. With trembling hands, she answered, knowing that Mrs. Beatrice could return at any moment and catch her on the phone. "Miss Whitfield?" said a professional male voice. "Yes, that's me," she replied weakly. "This is Dr. Hartley from Central Hospital. About your mother, Eleanor Whitfield," he began, and Margaret felt the world spin. "What happened? Is she okay?" she asked in panic. There was a pause that seemed to last an eternity. "I'm sorry, we did everything we could. Her heart is failing rapidly without the proper medication. Now it's just a matter of time until she passes," he said with genuine regret. Margaret had to lean on the desk to avoid falling, the phone almost slipping from her sweaty hand. "How long?" she managed to ask. "Hours. Maybe a day if we're lucky. I'm sorry," he replied. The phone fell from her hand. The phone fell onto the soft carpet of the office, making a muffled sound that echoed in the silence of the luxurious environment. And Margaret stood paralyzed, looking at the device as if it were a venomous snake that had just attacked her. The doctor's words reverberated in her mind like a funeral bell, each repetition making reality more cruel and inevitable. Her mother was dying, had only hours to live, and she was there, cleaning the office of a man who probably spent on one lunch what would save Eleanor. Her legs were shaking so much that she had to lean on the mahogany desk to avoid falling, leaving the marks of her sweaty hands on the freshly polished surface, exactly the kind of mistake that Mrs. Beatrice would love to find. Despair consumed her like fire, burning inside while she struggled to process the information that she was about to become an orphan, alone in the world, all because she didn't have money to buy some pills. "Mom, forgive me. I failed you," she murmured into the empty office. Tears began to fall, dripping onto the waxed floor she had just cleaned. The office door opened violently, and Mrs. Beatrice entered like a storm, her face red with anger, seeing Margaret standing in the middle of the room, the phone on the floor, and clearly not working. "What do you think you're doing? Taking personal calls in the CEO's office? Do you have any idea of the gravity of this?" she shouted, approaching with heavy steps that made her shoes hit the floor like hammers. Margaret turned to face her, her face wet with tears, her eyes red and swollen, all professional composure completely destroyed by the news she had just received. "Mrs. Beatrice, please, I need to go to the hospital. My mother is dying. The doctor said she has only hours left. Please, let me go see her one last time," she begged, clasping her hands in supplication, all pride abandoned in the face of emergency. "Mrs." Beatrice crossed her arms, her face a mask of disbelief and irritation. "You really think I'll fall for that? First you arrive late with an emergency excuse. Now you want to leave in the middle of your shift with another emergency." "I wasn't born yesterday," she replied with disdain. Margaret took a step toward her, desperate. "It's true, the doctor just called. She's dying because we don't have money for her heart medication. If I lose this job, I lose the health insurance that could save her. But if I don't go now, I might not see her alive again," explained Margaret between sobs, the words rushing out in her desperation. "Mrs." Beatrice seemed to consider for a moment, and Margaret felt a spark of hope. But then the supervisor's face hardened even more, and she walked to the mahogany desk, where there was a tray with coffee service that the CEO always kept for important visitors. Taking the full cup, she deliberately turned it over, spilling the dark liquid on the white marble floor. The coffee spreading in a puddle that looked like dark blood against the light surface. "Oops, how clumsy of me. Clean this up immediately. And I want to see my reflection in this floor when you're done," she ordered with a cruel smile. Margaret looked incredulously between the coffee puddle and the supervisor's sadistic face. "You can't be serious. My mother is dying," she exclaimed in a hoarse voice. Mrs. Beatrice moved closer until she was inches from her face. "Listen carefully, because I won't repeat myself. You have two choices. Clean up this coffee now and finish the work, ensuring the job and health insurance for your mother, or walk out that door now and lose everything. What will it be?" said Mrs. Beatrice in a low, threatening voice. Margaret felt something break inside her. Perhaps it was her dignity, perhaps it was her heart. But she knew she had no real choice. Without the health insurance, Eleanor would die anyway. With mechanical movements, she went to the cleaning cart and took the necessary cloths and products, kneeling on the cold floor while tears continued to fall, mixing with the spilled coffee. "Mrs. Beatrice watched with satisfaction for a few moments before heading to the door. "You have 30 minutes to finish everything. Mr. Thornton will arrive at any moment, and if he finds a single thing out of place, you're out. And your dear mommy." "Well, that would be a shame, wouldn't it?" she said before leaving Margaret alone with her humiliation. "Hang in there, Mom. Just a little longer," she whispered as she scrubbed the floor. Each movement was torture, not physical but emotional, knowing that while she cleaned coffee spilled out of pure sadism, her mother was alone in a hospital bed, dying without the presence of the only person she had left in the world. The tears wouldn't stop falling, and several times she had to stop to wipe them away because it was becoming difficult to see what she was doing. After cleaning the coffee, she went back to polishing every surface in the office, her hands trembling so much that she almost dropped a crystal paperweight that was probably worth more than a year of her salary. It was while cleaning a mahogany bookshelf on the side wall that something caught her attention. Among leather-bound books and expensive art objects, there was a glass box with what appeared to be a military medal. It was golden with ribbons faded by time, and even through the glass she could see the inscription Peacekeeper Medal, engraved in elegant letters. "This medal reminds me of something," she thought absently as she cleaned the glass. But then something made her stop, a distant memory floating from the past. It was a Sunday afternoon years ago when Eleanor still had the strength to get out of bed, and they were organizing old boxes in the closet. Her mother had shown her a dark wooden box, opening it with reverent care to reveal a medal identical to the one now before her eyes. "This medal belonged to your grandfather, my daughter. He received it for an extraordinary act of bravery during the war. Only 12 were ever awarded throughout history," Eleanor had said with pride and sadness mixed together. Margaret had asked why they never told this story to anyone, and Eleanor had replied that some stories were too dangerous to be told, that some secrets protected more than revelations. Now looking at the identical medal in the office of the richest man in town, Margaret felt a shiver run down her spine. "It cannot be a coincidence," she murmured as she moved closer to the glass box. She was so absorbed observing the medal that she didn't hear the door silently opening behind her. "Admiring my most valuable decoration?" said a deep, cold voice that made her jump with fright, almost dropping the feather duster she was holding. Margaret turned quickly and found herself face to face with William Thornton, the CEO of the company, the man whose office she was cleaning. He was exactly as the photos in the newspapers showed, tall, imposing, with perfectly combed grey hair and penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see through people. He wore a suit that certainly cost more than the apartment where she lived, and his presence filled the room in a way that made her feel even smaller and more insignificant. "Mr. Thornton, I'm sorry. I was just cleaning and—" she began stammering, but he interrupted her with a gesture of his hand. "You seemed fascinated by the medal. It's not common for cleaning staff to be interested in military history," he observed, approaching the shelf. Margaret lowered her head, expecting to be fired right there. "My mother has a medal just like that one," she murmured without thinking. The words came out before she could contain them. The silence that followed was so heavy that Margaret could hear her own heart beating erratically in her chest. When she raised her eyes, she saw that William Thornton had become completely still, his face pale as if he had seen a ghost, his wide eyes fixed on her with an intensity that frightened her. "What did you say?" he asked with a tense voice, taking a step in her direction. Margaret instinctively backed away, intimidated by the sudden change in his behavior. "I said my mother has an identical medal, sir. She keeps it in an old box." "It belonged to my grandfather," she responded nervously. William moved closer, his eyes studying every detail of her face, as if looking for something specific. "Impossible. Only 12 Peacemaker medals were awarded in all of history. I've tracked each one of them. I know where every medal is, who received it, when they died," he said with an urgent voice. Margaret swallowed hard, not understanding his extreme reaction. "But it's true, sir. My mother always kept it with great care. She said it was our most precious inheritance," she insisted. William grabbed her arm firmly, not hurting but firm enough that she couldn't move away, his eyes burning with an almost feverish intensity. "What is your mother's name? Answer me," he demanded with urgency that bordered on desperation. Margaret was frightened now, not understanding what had triggered that reaction, but she answered with a trembling voice. Eleanor Whitfield, but her maiden name was Eleanor Smith," she said. The effect was instant and dramatic. William released her arm as if he had been burned, taking 2 steps back while his face went from pale to completely white, his hands visibly shaking. "Eleanor Smith? Your mother is Eleanor Smith?" he repeated with a hoarse voice, as if the words were difficult to pronounce. Margaret nodded, completely confused by the situation. William ran to his desk and grabbed the phone, dialing with trembling fingers. "Patricia, cancel all my meetings." "Now," he shouted into the device. Then he dialed another number. "Military Records Department, this is William Thornton. I need all information about Eleanor Smith, Red Cross nurse, now," he ordered. While waiting on the phone, William turned to Margaret with wild eyes, like a man possessed by some extraordinary revelation. "Where is your mother? Where is Eleanor Smith now?" he asked with desperate urgency. Margaret felt tears returning as she remembered her mother's terrible situation, and her voice broke as she answered. "She is at Central Hospital, sir, in the ICU. She is dying because we don't have money for her heart medication. The doctor said she has only hours to live," she explained between sobs. William dropped the phone without even hanging up, his face a mask of horror and urgency. "No, it can't be. After all these years, I can't lose her now," he exclaimed, more to himself than to her. Then, as if making a sudden decision, he grabbed Margaret's arm again. "Let's go. Now. There's no time to waste," he said, pulling her toward the door. Margaret barely had time to process what was happening. "Sir, I don't understand," she began, but he interrupted her. "There's no time for explanations now. Your mother saved my grandfather's life during the war. He searched for her for 40 years until he died without finding her," William shouted, as he practically dragged her down the hallway toward the private elevator. He grabbed his cell phone and began making frantic calls as they descended. "Dr. Morrison, it's me, William. Drop everything and go to Central Hospital now. Cardiac ICU. Bring your entire team," he ordered. Then he called another number. "Prepare the helicopter. I need to reach Central Hospital in 5 minutes," he commanded. Margaret was stunned, trying to process the surreal turn of events. One moment she was being humiliated, cleaning coffee from the floor, and the next, the most powerful man in the city was mobilizing resources to save her mother. They exited the elevator directly to the building's rooftop, where a helicopter was already spinning its blades. "Get in," William shouted over the deafening noise. Margaret had never been in a helicopter in her life. During the short but turbulent flight, William continued making calls, shouting orders over the noise of the blades, mobilizing what seemed to be an army of doctors and resources. "I want the best cardiologists in the country there in an hour. I don't care how much it costs. Charter private jets if necessary," he shouted into the phone. Margaret held onto her seat, torn between the fear of flying and the growing hope that maybe, just maybe, her mother could be saved. The helicopter landed on the hospital's helipad in a matter of minutes, and William jumped out before the blades had completely stopped, pulling Margaret with him. They ran through the hospital corridors, William still shouting into the phone. "Eleanor Smith saved my grandfather in 1944. She faced an entire patrol alone to protect him. He left specific instructions. If we ever found her or her family, we owed them everything, everything." he explained to someone on the phone. Margaret could barely keep up with his long strides. They arrived at the cardiac ICU in a burst of activity, and the head nurse came running when she recognized William Thornton, clearly shocked to see the billionaire there. "Mr. Thornton, what? How can I help?" she stammered. William cut her off with urgency. "Eleanor Whitfield, also known as Eleanor Smith, where is she?" he asked. The nurse quickly consulted her records. "Bed 12, sir, but I should warn you that her condition is critical." "Without the proper medications," she began, but William interrupted her. "She will have everything she needs, the best medications, the best doctors, whatever it costs," he declared. At that moment, the doctor who had called Margaret appeared, clearly surprised by the commotion. "Miss Whitfield, what's happening here?" he asked, confused. William turned to him with flaming eyes. "What's happening is that you're letting a war hero die for lack of medication. This ends now," he thundered. The doctor went pale. "Mr. Thornton, we did the best we could with the available resources." The doctor tried to explain, but William wasn't interested in excuses. "Resources are no longer a problem. I want a complete team here in 15 minutes. Equipment, medications, everything," he ordered. Then he turned to Margaret, his face softening slightly. "Let's see your mother," he said more gently. They were led to the bed where Eleanor was, and Margaret almost didn't recognize her. She looked even smaller and more fragile, surrounded by all those machines, her face as pale as paper, her lips with a bluish tint that indicated inadequate oxygenation. William approached the bed with reverence, as if approaching something sacred. "Eleanor Smith. After all these years," he murmured, his voice choked. Then he turned to the nurse. "I want to know everything about her condition." "Every detail," he demanded. The nurse began explaining about the heart failure, the urgent need for specific medications and possibly surgery. It was then that another doctor came running into the room, holding what appeared to be test results. She was a young woman in a white coat with a disturbed expression. "Dr. Hartley, I need to speak with you urgently about patient Eleanor Whitfield," she said breathlessly. Dr. Hartley approached and they spoke in low voices for a few moments, looking at papers with increasingly serious expressions. William noticed and approached them. "What's happening? Speak," he ordered. The doctor hesitated, looking between William and Margaret. "Sir, during the routine exams you authorized, we discovered something in her old tests. Mrs. Eleanor had heart surgery 20 years ago that wasn't in our initial records." She paused, clearly worried. "Continue," William insisted. The doctor took a deep breath before continuing. "There's extensive scar tissue that we hadn't detected before. This completely changes the treatment protocol we were planning," she said. William tensed. "Does this mean she can't be treated?" he asked with a strained voice. The doctor quickly shook her head. "No, sir. It means we need a different approach, more delicate, more specific. We'll need specialists in reconstructive cardiac surgery. It's more complex, but not impossible," she explained. Margaret felt her legs weaken, more complications when they barely had hope. William was visibly frustrated but determined. "Then bring those specialists. I don't care where they have to come from," he ordered. The doctor consulted the papers again. "We're already contacting Dr. Morrison, whom you mentioned. He's exactly the type of specialist we need. But sir, there's something else," she said. William and Margaret looked at her expectantly. "Her condition has deteriorated faster than we expected. We need to stabilize her urgently before any procedure. The next 2 hours are critical," she informed them. William didn't hesitate. "Do everything. Immediately. I want a complete team monitoring her second by second," he ordered. Then he turned to Margaret, seeing the terror in her eyes. "She will survive, I promise." "Your mother saved my grandfather. Now it's my turn to save her," he said with iron determination. The head nurse approached urgently. "Family of Eleanor Whitfield?" she called, looking between Margaret and William. "Yes," they both answered at the same time, although William wasn't technically family. The nurse seemed to notice something strange but continued due to the urgency. "The chief physician needs to speak with you immediately. There's a complication we discovered during the additional exams that Mr. Thornton authorized," she said with a grave expression. Margaret felt the panic return. After all this, there were still more problems. William held her arm, offering silent support as they followed the nurse. "We discovered something during the exams that completely changes everything we knew about the case," she said as they walked hurriedly. Margaret squeezed William's hand without even realizing it, united now by the shared fear of what they would discover. The chief physician quickly led them through a side corridor of the ICU to a small consultation room, where X-rays and CT scans were scattered across an illuminated table, each image showing Eleanor's heart from different angles, like a map of a lost battle. He was a 60-year-old man with white hair and hands that trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the urgency of what he had to communicate. Margaret felt her legs weaken at the sight of all those images, her mother's heart exposed in black and white, revealing secrets that could mean life or death. William remained by her side, his solid presence the only thing preventing her from completely collapsing, as the doctor began pointing to the images with a pen. "Look here, this dark area," he said, circling a region in the image that looked like a threatening shadow. "It's an aortic aneurysm that wasn't detected in the initial exams because it was hidden behind scar tissue. It's about to rupture. When that happens..." He didn't need to finish the sentence, the meaning was clear. "How much time does she have?" William asked with a tense voice. The doctor looked at the clock on the wall before answering. "Minutes, maybe an hour if we're very lucky. But every second that passes increases the risk of rupture. If that happens, nothing can save her," the doctor responded with professional gravity that couldn't completely hide his human concern. Margaret had to lean on the table to avoid falling, the room spinning around her as she processed the information that her mother was literally minutes away from death. William immediately grabbed his phone, dialing with frantic speed while shouting orders. "I need Dr. Harrison from Johns Hopkins here now. I don't care if you have to charter a military jet," he shouted into the device. Then he called another number. "Dr. Nakamura from Tokyo. How long to get here? 5 hours? That won't do," he continued, increasingly desperate. The local doctor raised his hand to interrupt him. "Mr. Thornton, there's no time to wait for anyone. Every minute that passes is one less minute of life for her," he said firmly. William slowly lowered the phone, the reality of the situation finally hitting him. "Can you perform the surgery?" he asked the doctor. The man hesitated before answering. "I can perform the surgery, yes. I've done similar procedures before, but I need to be completely honest with you about the risks," said the doctor, looking directly at Margaret, who was as pale as paper but kept her eyes fixed on him. "This is one of the most delicate procedures in cardiac surgery. The aneurysm is in an extremely difficult position, close to several vital arteries. Her heart is already severely weakened by the lack of proper medication. The chances of success are..." He paused, clearly reluctant to give the number. "How much?" insisted Margaret with a weak but determined voice. The doctor took a deep breath before answering. 50%. Maybe less considering her overall condition. It's an enormous risk, but the alternative is certain death, he explained. Margaret didn't hesitate for even a second, the decision already made before he even finished speaking. "Do the surgery." "Please, doctor, it's her only chance," she exclaimed with desperation and determination mixed. William immediately spoke up in support. "Doctor, you'll have all the resources you need, equipment, additional staff, anything. I'll bring equipment from other hospitals if necessary, helicopters, whatever it takes," assured William with the authority of someone accustomed to moving mountains with his orders. The doctor nodded, already mentally preparing the list of what he would need. "I'll need the best team available. Anesthesiologists specialized in critical cardiac cases, nurses with experience in high-risk surgery, blood bank prepared for multiple transfusions," he listed quickly. William was already on the phone again, shouting orders to mobilize everything the doctor had requested. "I want the entire stock of O-negative blood from the private blood bank here in 15 minutes. And bring that German extracorporeal circulation machine from St. Luke's Hospital," he ordered. The doctor continued explaining the procedure, while a nurse entered to inform that the operating room was being prepared. "It will be a procedure of at least 4 hours, possibly more. We'll have to open the thorax, repair the aneurysm and reconstruct part of the aorta. Her heart will have to be stopped during part of the procedure," he explained. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. "Stop her heart," repeated Margaret with horror, the idea of deliberately stopping her mother's already weak heart seeming against all instinct. The doctor explained patiently, understanding her fear. We'll use an extracorporeal circulation machine. It will take over the functions of the heart and lungs during the critical part of the surgery. It's standard procedure, but in an already compromised heart like hers, it adds significant risks. Her body may not react well to the process, he said. A team of nurses rushed into the room. Doctor, room 3 is ready. The patient is being prepared now. The anesthesiologist, Dr. Santos, is on his way, one of them informed. The doctor turned to Margaret and William. I need to go prepare. You can see her for 2 minutes before we start, but it has to be quick. Every second counts now, he said, already heading for the door. Margaret practically ran down the hall to Eleanor's room with William right behind. Eleanor was awake but clearly sedated, her eyes struggling to focus when she saw her daughter. Maria, my dear daughter, she murmured in a voice so weak it was barely audible. Margaret held her hand tightly, feeling how cold it was. Eleanor looked at William, who approached the bed with reverence, and her eyes widened slightly in a moment of lucidity. You have his eyes, the soldier's eyes. Theodore, murmured Eleanor, a tear running down her pale face. William was visibly moved, gently holding Eleanor's other hand. Yes, Mrs. Eleanor. Theodore Thornton was my grandfather. You saved him so many years ago. Now it's my turn to save you. I promise you'll have the best care possible. My grandfather never forgot your courage, he said with a choked voice. Eleanor tried to smile, but the effort seemed to drain her last strength. The nurses began to prepare Eleanor for transport, checking the IV lines and preparing the portable monitors. Mother, you're going to be fine. You'll have the surgery, and when you wake up, I'll be here waiting. We'll finally have the life we deserve, said Margaret, trying to convey a confidence she didn't feel. Eleanor weakly squeezed her hand. Take care of yourself, my daughter. If something happens, know that you were my greatest joy, Eleanor whispered. Margaret shook her head violently. Don't talk like that, Mother. You will survive. You have to survive, insisted Margaret, as tears flowed freely down her face. The nurses began to move the stretcher, and Margaret had to let go of her mother's hand, feeling as if she were letting go of life itself. William placed his hand on her shoulder as they watched the stretcher disappear through the double doors of the surgical area, the sound of wheels on the floor echoing down the corridor like an omen. Let's go to the private waiting room I've arranged. It's going to be a long wait, said William, gently guiding her. Margaret looked one last time at the closed doors, her heart tight with the terrible premonition that it might have been the last time she saw her mother alive. The private waiting room was more comfortable than the common one, with leather sofas and a small pantry, but no luxury could disguise the smell of disinfectant and fear that permeated every hospital. Margaret let herself fall onto the sofa, her legs finally giving way after hours of tension. She has to survive, I can't lose her, she's all I have, she murmured, hugging her own knees. William sat beside her, clearly struggling with his own emotions while continuing to make calls, coordinating resources and ensuring that everything possible was being done. I want 3 surgeons on standby in case they need help, and keep a direct line with the cardiology center in Houston for consultation, he ordered. Between calls, he turned to Margaret. Your mother is an extraordinary woman. She survived a war, saved lives, raised you alone. She won't give up now, he said, trying to comfort her. Margaret nodded, wanting to believe. Could you tell me more about what she did for your grandfather? I need to hear something good right now, she asked. William put away his phone, and his eyes softened with inherited memories. My grandfather told this story every time the family gathered. It was December 1944, one of the harshest winters of the war. He was on a reconnaissance mission when his unit was ambushed, he began. Margaret listened attentively, needing the distraction. He was hit by grenade shrapnel and was left to die in an abandoned barn. He spent 2 days delirious with fever, certain he would die alone in that frozen place. William continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone telling a family legend. On the 3rd day, when he had already lost hope, a young Red Cross nurse appeared. It was Eleanor, your mother, only 19 years old at the time. She was alone, separated from her unit during a bombing, looking for survivors, he said. Margaret tried to imagine her mother so young, facing the horrors of war. She could have continued looking for her own unit, but when she saw my grandfather, she stayed. She used her last medical supplies on him, shared her rations, kept him warm with her own coat during the freezing nights. William narrated with evident admiration. When an enemy patrol approached on the 4th day, she had to make a decision. Surrendering would mean salvation for her as medical personnel, but certain death for my grandfather, he continued. Margaret was completely absorbed in the story. What did she do? Asked Margaret, even though she already knew her mother had saved the soldier. William smiled with borrowed pride. She hid my grandfather under the hay and left the barn making noise, pretending to be lost and disoriented. She drew the patrol away, led them in the opposite direction. When she returned hours later, she was injured. She had fallen into a ravine while escaping from them, but she continued caring for my grandfather, he related. For 3 more days they remained hidden, she only going out to fetch water and any food she could find. On the 7th day, when Allied forces finally arrived, my grandfather was alive because of her. The doctors said he wouldn't have survived another day without her care, William concluded. Margaret felt her chest swell with pride. She never told me any of this. She was always so modest about her past, she said. William took the old photograph from his pocket again. My grandfather searched for her for decades, hired investigators, checked records in 12 countries. But Eleanor had disappeared. Changed her name, changed countries, he explained. A nurse entered the room, interrupting the conversation. First surgery update, she announced, and both Margaret and William stood up immediately. The initial incision was successfully made. The doctor is accessing the thoracic cavity now. The patient's vital signs are stable within the expected parameters for this stage, she informed them professionally. But the doctor asked to let you know that the aneurysm is larger than the images showed. They'll need to expand the intervention area, she added. Margaret felt her stomach tighten. Is that bad? She asked. The nurse hesitated before answering. It makes the procedure more complex and time-consuming. But the doctor is very experienced. He's confident, she said before leaving. William immediately returned to the phone. I need more blood units, and bring the most advanced cardiac monitoring system you have, he ordered. The next 30 minutes dragged on like hours. The second update came with more concerning news. A different nurse, this one with a more tense expression, entered the room. The doctor found additional damage to the cardiac tissue. There are multiple areas of necrosis that didn't show up on the exams. He'll have to make more extensive repairs, she informed them. Margaret had to sit down, her legs trembling. Does she still have a chance? She asked in a small voice. The nurse tried to smile reassuringly. The doctor hasn't given up. He said he's seen worse cases recover, but it will take longer than expected, she answered. William approached Margaret. She's strong. She'll overcome this, he said, although his own voice betrayed concern. Another hour passed in silent agony, broken only by the occasional sound of William's phone and his urgent orders. Margaret tried to pray, tried to meditate, tried anything to calm the storm in her mind. What if she doesn't survive? How will I live without her? She murmured. William held her hand. The 3rd hour brought the worst scare yet. 2 nurses rushed into the room, their faces pale and urgent. The patient's heart went into fibrillation. The doctor is controlling it, but we need authorization to use the experimental stabilization protocol, one of them said quickly. William didn't hesitate. Authorize everything, any protocol, any procedure, save her, he shouted. The nurses rushed out and Margaret collapsed in sobs. She's dying, isn't she? My mother is dying, she cried. William hugged her, something that surprised them both by the sudden intimacy of the gesture. No, she's fighting, and we're going to fight with her, he said firmly. The next 20 minutes were the longest in Margaret's life. She could hear urgent movement in the hallway, tense voices, equipment being transported. Each sound made her imagine the worst. Finally, a nurse returned. They managed to stabilize her. The heart returned to normal rhythm. But it was very close, she informed them, visibly relieved. The 4th hour arrived without updates, which left both extremely anxious. William was pacing back and forth like a caged lion, his phone constantly at his ear. Why don't we have news? What's happening in there? He kept asking various medical contacts. Margaret was huddled on the sofa, hugging a pillow as if it were an anchor. That was when they heard shouts coming from the hallway. We need more O-negative blood, now! Someone shouted, A nurse came running into the room. "There was a hemorrhage. The aortic suture ruptured. We're losing her. We urgently need O-negative donors," she announced in panic. William didn't hesitate for a second. "I'm O-negative." "Take my blood now," he said, already rolling up the sleeve of his expensive suit jacket. The nurse looked surprised, but there was no time for protocols. "Come with me, quickly," she said. Margaret followed them. In minutes, they had set up an improvised collection station in an adjacent room. William was laid on a stretcher while two nurses prepared the emergency collection equipment. "Take as much as you can. She needs it more than I do," he said. Margaret held his free hand as the blood began to flow through the tube. "Why are you doing all this? You don't even know us," she asked emotionally. William looked her in the eyes. "Because I've spent my entire life hearing about the woman who saved my grandfather. Because he died with the regret of never having been able to repay her. Because honor and gratitude have no expiration date," he replied. The blood continued flowing, bag after bag, until the nurse said it was the maximum safe amount. William was visibly pale and weak when they helped him back to the waiting room. "This should help. I'll check on how the surgery is going," said the nurse as she left. Margaret helped William sit on the couch. "Thank you. I have no words to thank you for everything you're doing," said Margaret with tears in her eyes. William, even though weak, managed to smile. "Your mother gave her blood, sweat and tears to save my grandfather. This is nothing compared to what she did," he replied. 30 more minutes passed in tense silence. The 5th hour of surgery had begun, far beyond what was initially expected. It was then that the assistant doctor appeared at the door, his coat stained and expression serious. "We need your authorization for an additional procedure," he said to Margaret. "Her heart is severely damaged. We need to perform a quadruple bypass in addition to the aneurysm repair. This adds 2 more hours to the surgery and more risks," he explained. Margaret didn't hesitate. "Do everything necessary to save her," she authorized. The doctor nodded and ran back to the operating room. William, even weak from blood loss, picked up the phone again. "Bring the bypass team from Metropolitan Hospital. Yes, the entire team. Helicopter now," he ordered with a weak but determined voice. Margaret watched him with admiration and gratitude. "You should rest. You donated blood," she said with concern. William shook his head. "I'll rest when your mother is safe," he stubbornly replied. The 6th hour began with another crisis. A nurse rushed in. "Her heart stopped. They're doing manual cardiac massage now," she informed them. Margaret felt the world spin. "No! Mom, please!" she screamed, trying to run to the operating room. William, even weak, managed to hold her back. "Let them work, trust the doctors," he said. The following minutes were pure agony. Margaret prayed, cried, begged any divine force that was listening. 10 minutes, 15 minutes, 20 minutes of agonizing silence. Finally, the same nurse returned, this time with a relieved expression. "They did it. Her heart is beating again. She's fighting," she announced. Margaret fell to her knees, the relief so intense that her legs couldn't support her. William, even weak, helped her to stand and return to the sofa. "Your mother is a warrior. She won't give up," he said. Another hour passed, now totaling 7 hours of surgery. Both were physically and emotionally exhausted. Margaret was dozing from exhaustion when the door opened again. This time it was the chief surgeon, still in surgical attire. Both jumped up, Margaret having to support William, who was still weak. The doctor walked slowly toward them, removing his surgical cap. His coat was visibly stained, his hands trembling slightly from exhaustion. "It was the most difficult surgery I've ever performed," he began. Margaret squeezed William's hand tightly. The doctor slowly removed his surgical mask, revealing a face marked by extreme exhaustion, sunken eyes and dry lips. He looked directly at Margaret, then at William, seeming to carefully choose his words. The silence extended for seconds that seemed eternal, each moment increasing the agony of waiting. "The surgery," he began with a hoarse voice, pausing to clear his throat. Margaret felt her heart stop, her entire life depending on the next words. "It was," the doctor continued, his eyes revealing the weight of what he had to say. "It was a success. Against all odds, she survived. She's stable," the doctor finally completed. and the words seemed to echo through the waiting room like a bell of liberation after hours of agony and despair. Margaret felt her legs give way completely, all the weight of the last few hours crashing down on her at once, and if it weren't for William's arms supporting her, she would have fallen right there on the cold hospital floor. The tears she had tried to hold back exploded into deep sobs, her body trembling violently as she cried against his chest, wetting his expensive suit jacket with tears of relief, gratitude, and emotional exhaustion. William held her firmly, his own voice breaking when he whispered words of comfort, saying that everything was fine now, that Eleanor had won the toughest battle of her life. The doctor waited patiently for them to compose themselves, perfectly understanding their reaction after so many hours of uncertainty and fear. She is an extraordinary fighter. In my 30 years of medicine, I've rarely seen someone survive so many complications in a single surgery, he said with genuine admiration. Margaret moved slightly away from William, wiping her face with trembling hands. "Can I see her?" "Please, doctor. I need to see my mother," Margaret asked with a voice hoarse from crying, her red and swollen eyes begging for this small mercy after so many hours of separation and uncertainty. The doctor hesitated for a moment, clearly assessing whether it would be appropriate, but something in her desperate expression convinced him. "She's sedated and will remain so for the next 48 hours. It's important that her body rests completely after the trauma of surgery. But you can see her for a few minutes. You just need to be prepared. She's connected to many machines, and it might look frightening," he warned. Margaret nodded vigorously. She would see her mother even if she were connected to 1,000 machines. Nothing mattered beyond the fact that Eleanor was alive. William remained by her side as they followed the doctor through the ICU corridors, passing other cubicles where families kept their own vigils, each fighting their particular battles against death. "Here she is," the doctor indicated as they arrived at a bed surrounded by equipment. Margaret had to contain a sob when she saw her mother. Eleanor looked even smaller and more fragile surrounded by all that technology, tubes coming out of her mouth, arms full of IV lines, her chest rising and falling to the mechanical rhythm of the ventilator, monitors everywhere showing numbers and graphs that Margaret didn't understand, but which signified life. She approached slowly, afraid of touching something and disrupting vital equipment, until she could gently hold her mother's hand, feeling the warmth that confirmed she was really alive. "Mom, it's me. You made it. You're the strongest woman I know. Now rest, I'll be here when you wake up," she whispered near Eleanor's ear, hoping that somehow she could hear. William observed the scene with evident emotion, this powerful man who commanded empires reduced to tears by the strength of love between mother and daughter. The doctor gave them a few more minutes before indicating they needed to leave. "She needs absolute rest. You also need to rest. It's been more than 7 hours of surgery. I imagine you're exhausted," he said with professional gentleness. Margaret didn't want to leave, but she knew he was right. Back in the private waiting room, Margaret finally allowed exhaustion to overcome her, collapsing onto the sofa while William made calls to cancel commitments and reorganize his schedule. "I'll stay here as long as necessary," he said after hanging up the last call. Margaret looked at him with infinite gratitude, still not completely believing that this powerful man had dropped everything to save her mother, a complete stranger, until a few hours ago. "Mr. Thornton, I will never be able to thank you enough. You saved her life, you saved our lives," she said with a choked voice. William sat beside her, his face showing a vulnerability that probably few had seen. "Margaret, please call me William, and don't thank me. Your mother saved my grandfather decades ago, gave him the chance to build everything our family has today. Without her, I wouldn't even exist. This debt transcends money or favors," he explained. Margaret nodded, understanding that for him this was a matter of family honor. "Now we need to think about the future. Your mother will need extensive care," he began. Margaret immediately felt the weight of reality return. "I know. I'll work double shifts, do overtime. Whatever it takes to pay for medications and treatments," Margaret said, already mentally calculating how she would cover all costs, even with the company health plan. William shook his head, a small smile appearing on his tired face. "You don't understand. I will cover all of Eleanor's medical expenses, not just this surgery, but all necessary treatment from now on." "It's the least I can do," he declared with firmness that admitted no discussion. Margaret was speechless, his generosity catching her completely off guard. "But, sir, William, this must cost a fortune," she protested weakly. William made a dismissive gesture with his hand. "Money is just paper when compared to a life, especially the life of someone who means so much to my family's history. Besides, you are officially an employee of Thornton Corporations now, with all the benefits that implies," he said. Margaret suddenly remembered the other urgent problem. The eviction. My God, with everything happening, I completely forgot. "We only have until tomorrow morning to leave the apartment," she exclaimed in panic. William immediately picked up the phone, dialing quickly while checking the clock that showed 3 in the morning. "Roberto? Yes, I know what time it is. I need you to resolve an urgent eviction situation," he said, to whom Margaret presumed was his lawyer. After giving the details of the address and situation, he hung up and turned to her. "It's resolved. My lawyers will negotiate with the landlord in the morning. You won't be evicted," he assured her. Margaret felt a weight lift from her shoulders, but there was still the matter of payment. "But the overdue rent." "It's 3 months that I owe," she said, embarrassed. William was already making another call. "Patricia, prepare an advance paycheck for Margaret Whitfield. Yes, the new employee in the services department. Equivalent to 3 months' salary as a signing bonus. I want it ready by this morning," he ordered. Margaret tried to protest, but he raised his hand. "It's an advance, not charity. You will work and earn every penny. Now, try to get some rest." "The next 48 hours will be long," he advised. Margaret leaned back on the sofa, her mind spinning with all the changes. The following hours passed in a blur of restless naps and periodic visits to the ICU to see Eleanor, always deeply asleep under sedation. William remained by Margaret's side the entire time, only leaving briefly to fetch coffee and food that she could barely touch. The next morning, he convinced her to go resolve the urgent matters while he kept vigil at the hospital. "If there's any change, anything at all, I'll call immediately," he promised. Margaret reluctantly agreed, knowing she needed to pay the rent and fetch clean clothes and important belongings from the apartment. William's lawyer met her at the apartment with a check that covered not only the 3 months overdue, but also 3 months in advance. "Mr. Thornton said to ensure you have housing security," explained the man in an impeccable suit. The landlord, who had personally arrived expecting to supervise the eviction, was shocked by the turnaround. "Well, if the payment is up to date, there's no reason for eviction," he said, taking the check with greedy hands. Margaret felt deep satisfaction seeing his expression. After quickly organizing some things in the apartment and grabbing a change of clothes, Margaret stopped at the pharmacy with the list of medications Eleanor would need upon discharge. The pharmacist whistled softly when he saw the prescription. "This will cost a small fortune, miss," he warned. Margaret showed the corporate card William had given her for medical emergencies. "Please prepare everything, and include the best vitamin supplements you have," she said, feeling for the first time in years the relief of not having to choose between medicine and food. With bags full of medications that would ensure her mother's proper recovery, she rushed back to the hospital. Upon arriving at the ICU, she found William talking with the doctor, both with serious expressions that made her heart race. "What happened? Is she okay?" she asked hurriedly. The doctor turned to her with a reassuring smile. "Your mother is responding very well. So well that we're considering reducing the sedation earlier than expected. If she continues like this, she might wake up tomorrow," he informed her. Margaret felt tears of joy welling up again. On the second day, as predicted, doctors began gradually reducing the sedation. Margaret was beside the bed holding Eleanor's hand when she saw the first signs of consciousness, a slight squeeze of her fingers, eyelids fluttering. Mom, it's me, Margaret. I'm here," she said softly, caressing Eleanor's face. Slowly, painfully, Eleanor opened her eyes, blinking against the soft light of the ICU. It took a few moments for her to focus, and when she finally saw her daughter's face, tears began to stream down her face. "Maria, my daughter," she whispered in a voice hoarse from the tube that had been removed hours earlier. Margaret was crying openly, repeatedly kissing her mother's hand. "I'm here, Mom. You made it. You were so strong." The surgery was a success, she said between sobs of joy. Eleanor tried to speak more, but Margaret calmed her. Don't strain yourself, Mom. Rest. We have all the time in the world now, she assured her. It was then that Eleanor noticed William standing respectfully in the corner of the room. Eleanor's eyes widened in recognition, and she tried to speak, clearly agitated. William approached slowly, his own eyes watery, seeing Eleanor awake and lucid. Mrs. Eleanor, please don't strain yourself. I am William Thornton, grandson of Theodore Thornton. We met before your surgery, he said softly. Eleanor began to cry harder, extending her trembling hand to him. William gently took it between his, kneeling beside the bed to be at her level. Theodore's grandson, and yes, I remember, murmured Eleanor emotionally. William nodded, himself fighting back tears. My grandfather spoke of you until the day of his death. He said you were the bravest woman he ever knew. He searched for you for decades, wanted to thank you, to repay you somehow, he said. Eleanor weakly shook her head. No need. I did what was right, she said with difficulty. William gently squeezed her hand. Mrs. Eleanor, you saved my family. Now it was my turn to save yours. It's an honor to finally meet you, he said with a choked voice. Margaret watched the interaction with a full heart, seeing her mother smile for the first time in a long time, a genuine smile despite the weakness and pain. Mr. Thornton paid for the entire surgery, Mom, the best doctors, everything. He saved your life, Margaret told her. Eleanor looked between the two, her eyes filling with tears again. I have no way to thank you, she began, but William gently interrupted her. You owe me nothing. On the contrary, my family has an eternal debt to you. My grandfather left specific instructions. If we ever found you or your family, we should do everything in our power to help. It's a matter of honor, he explained. Eleanor closed her eyes, clearly too emotional to continue. The doctor entered at that moment, smiling to see his patient awake. Welcome back, Mrs. Eleanor. You gave us quite a scare, but you're a warrior, he said, while checking the monitors. Now you need to rest. No excessive talking or emotion for now, he instructed. William and Margaret agreed, promising to return later. In the following days, Eleanor progressively improved, being transferred from the ICU to a private room that William had arranged. Margaret spent as much time as possible by her side, leaving only to work. William had insisted that she keep her job and routine. Your mother will need stability when she leaves here. Knowing that you have financial security will help her recovery, he sensibly argued. Mrs. Beatrice had been notably transferred to another branch after William discovered about the humiliations of the first day, and Margaret now reported to a much more humane and understanding supervisor. On the 5th day of recovery, Eleanor was strong enough to sit up and eat solid foods. It was then that Margaret remembered the wooden box and the letter her father had left. Mom, remember the box you kept? Dad's letter is there, she said. Eleanor nodded, her eyes showing a mixture of sadness and curiosity. Did you bring it? She asked. Margaret confirmed, taking the box from her purse. With trembling hands, Margaret opened the yellowed envelope, her father's familiar handwriting making her heart ache with longing. She began to read aloud to Eleanor, who held her hand tightly. My dear Margaret, if you are reading this, it means I have departed before the time I would have liked. First, I want you to know that you were the best thing that happened in my life. Each day by your side was a gift that I did not deserve, but for which I will be eternally grateful, the letter began. Margaret had to stop, emotion choking her voice. Eleanor squeezed her hand encouragingly. To my beloved Eleanor, I ask forgiveness for departing first, for leaving you alone in this difficult world. I know I promised we would grow old together, but life had other plans. Take care of our daughter. I know she will take care of you, Margaret continued reading. Both were crying now, embracing on the hospital bed. I leave no material inheritance, I could not build a fortune. But I leave something more valuable, the example that dignity has no price, that love overcomes any difficulty, the letter said. Margaret had to stop again. Live with your heads held high. Never owe anything to anyone except gratitude. The world can take everything from you except your honor and your love for each other, the letter concluded. With eternal love, Arthur. Margaret carefully folded the letter, both crying embraced, the simple document meaning more than any treasure. William, who had silently entered during the reading, was visibly moved in the corner of the room. "Your father was a wise man. You have honored every word of his," he said respectfully. Eleanor nodded, wiping away tears. "Arthur would be grateful for what you have done for us, Mr. Thornton," she said. William approached. "Please, call me William. And I am the one who is grateful for having the chance to repay, even if partially, what you did for my family," he replied. The three remained silent for a few moments, united by bonds that transcended blood or obligation. "Now let's focus on your complete recovery. The doctors say 1 more week and you can go home," William announced. Eleanor smiled, the first time in a long time that the future seemed promising. During the following week, Eleanor continued to improve rapidly, surprising even the doctors with her recovery. Margaret had returned to her work routine, now with the peace of mind of knowing she had a stable job and comprehensive health insurance. Her co-workers, who had witnessed the humiliation of the first day, now treated her with respect and admiration for the strength she had shown. William visited daily, bringing flowers, books, anything to make Eleanor's hospital stay more comfortable. He and Eleanor talked at length about the past, about Theodore, about the paths that life had taken to finally bring them together. "Your grandfather was a good man. Even when wounded, he insisted that I eat first, that I rest. He was stubborn like you," Eleanor recounted fondly. William smiled, listening to the stories. On the 10th day, the chief physician came with good news. "Mrs. Eleanor, you're cleared to go home. Your recovery has been remarkable," he announced. Margaret almost jumped with joy. "But you'll need continued care, physical therapy, regular follow-ups," the doctor continued. "Everything is already arranged," William assured. "I've hired a private nurse for the first month, then we'll see according to need. All medications and treatments are covered," he informed. Margaret tried to protest, saying she would take care of her mother herself, but William was firm. "You need to work, Margaret, and your mother needs professional care at this initial stage. Please accept this help," he asked. Eleanor intervened gently. "Maria, he's right. Accepting help when we need it isn't weakness, it's wisdom," she said. Margaret reluctantly agreed, knowing they were right. On the day of discharge, William arranged a comfortable car to take them home. The apartment had been cleaned and organized by a team he hired. The refrigerator was full, and there were fresh flowers in every room. "You deserve to return to a welcoming home," he said simply. Eleanor was too emotional to speak. She just squeezed his hand in gratitude. "Welcome back, Mother," said Margaret, helping her sit in her favorite armchair. Eleanor looked around at the humble home they had almost lost. "It seems like a dream, all this nightmare and then the miracle," Eleanor murmured, touching the arms of the chair as if she needed to confirm it was real. Margaret knelt beside her, holding her still fragile but now life-filled hands. "It was real, Mum. Every terrible moment and every miracle. But now it's over. You're home, you're alive, and we'll be fine," she assured. William, who had supervised the delivery of groceries and medications, approached them. "I'll leave you to rest now. The nurse will come tomorrow morning for the first session. Any need, call me immediately," he said, leaving a new phone on the table. "It already has my number and all the doctors programmed," he explained. Eleanor called him before he left. "William, wait," she asked. He turned around. "Thank you from the bottom of my heart. You gave life back not just to me, but to my daughter as well," she said, with tears in her eyes. William was visibly moved. "Mrs. Eleanor, the gratitude is all mine. I was finally able to honor my grandfather's memory," he replied. After he left, mother and daughter held each other in silence. "I never thought I would live to see this day, Maria. A day without despair, without fear of tomorrow," Eleanor confessed, caressing her daughter's hair as she did when she was a child. Margaret closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to relax after years of constant tension. "Dad was right in his letter. We maintained our dignity and life rewarded us," she said. Eleanor nodded, looking at the wooden box that now occupied a place of honor on the shelf. "Arthur would be proud of you, of how you faced everything, of how you fought for us," said Eleanor. Margaret smiled through tears. "I learned from the best, from both of you," she replied. That afternoon, as the sun came through the window of the small apartment, Mother and daughter simply existed together, without fear, without despair, only with gratitude for the miracle of life and for the kindness that still exists in the world. The grandfather's medal shone softly on the shelf, a silent witness to how acts of courage and kindness create waves through time, connecting lives and healing old wounds. "Tomorrow begins our new life," said Eleanor. Margaret silently agreed, knowing that tomorrow had finally ceased to be a threat. 6 months later, the Sunday morning sun gently entered through the curtains of the small apartment, illuminating a space that, although it was the same as 6 months ago, seemed completely transformed by the energy of life that now filled it. Margaret was sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by books and materials from the online business administration course she was taking, her notebook open to a paused video lecture while she jotted down important concepts in an already well-used notebook. The sound of pots and pans coming from the kitchen indicated that Eleanor was preparing the special Sunday lunch, a tradition they had established since her complete recovery. The humble apartment breathed dignity and peace, with fresh flowers in a vase on the coffee table, Eleanor's medications organized in a decorated box she had embroidered herself, and family photographs framed on the wall, including a new one showing her, Eleanor, and William smiling on the day of the hospital discharge. "Maria, have you finished the chapter on financial management yet? William arrives in an hour and you know how punctual he is," Eleanor called from the kitchen. Margaret smiled, temporarily closing the book. "Almost done, Mum." "Just 2 more pages," Margaret replied, although she knew she would need more time to fully absorb the complex content she was studying. In the last 6 months, her life had changed drastically. The promotion to assistant supervisor at work had come after she implemented a new organizational system that improved the department's efficiency by 30%, proving that she deserved the position not out of pity or favor, but through genuine competence. The better salary allowed them to keep the apartment payments up to date and still have enough for small luxuries that were unthinkable before, like weekly fresh flowers and quality ingredients for Eleanor's recipes. She got up to check on her mother in the kitchen, finding Eleanor moving with surprising agility for someone who was on the brink of death 6 months ago. Physical therapy had worked wonders, combined with Eleanor's iron determination to regain her independence. "It smells wonderful, Mum. Is it the famous orange sauce chicken?" Margaret asked, hugging her mother from behind. Eleanor laughed, that crystalline sound that had disappeared for so long and now echoed through the apartment again. "You know it's William's favorite dish. That man may command an empire, but he melts completely when he tastes my cooking," Eleanor said with evident affection in her voice, stirring the sauce that gently bubbled on the stove. The relationship between them had evolved from formal gratitude to something much deeper and more genuine. William was no longer the distant savior, but an integral part of their lives, the son Eleanor never had, the older brother Margaret always wished for. Every last Sunday of the month, he religiously showed up for lunch, always bringing something, sometimes dessert from an expensive bakery, sometimes just his presence and good conversation. "Mum, you shouldn't push yourself so hard." "The doctor said to take it easy," Margaret warned, noticing that Eleanor had prepared not only the main dish but also several side dishes. Eleanor made a dismissive gesture with the wooden spoon. "Cooking isn't effort, it's joy. Besides, I need to keep my hands busy when I'm not sewing," she replied. Margaret smiled, knowing it was true. Eleanor had transformed her talent with needle and thread into a small source of extra income, not out of extreme necessity as before, but because she liked to feel productive and independent. Her delicate embroidery and cross-stitch work had gained fame in the neighborhood, and William became her biggest client, constantly ordering pieces to gift business partners and friends. They say truly quality handwork is rare these days. "Your embroideries are true works of art," he always said when making new orders, paying generous amounts that Eleanor tried to refuse but he insisted were fair. The intercom rang precisely at noon, and Margaret went to answer, knowing it would be William, punctual as always. "Come on up, the door's open," she said through the intercom, quickly returning to put away her study materials. Minutes later, William entered carrying a box from a French bakery and an arrangement of sunflowers, Eleanor's favorite flowers. "Good morning, family," he greeted them with the broad smile he reserved only for these moments. Margaret hugged him warmly, all professional protocol forgotten in these Sunday gatherings. "I brought fresh croissants and that chocolate cake you both love," William announced, placing the box on the table while Eleanor came out of the kitchen, still wearing an apron, to greet him. She hugged him with a mother's affection, and he reciprocated with the tenderness of a son. This family dynamic built not by blood, but by choice and mutual gratitude. "You spoil us, William. Every month it's this abundance," Eleanor gently scolded him while arranging the sunflowers in a vase. William laughed, that genuine sound his employees rarely heard, but that was common in that apartment. "Here's the least I can do for someone who feeds me the best homemade food in the city. 5-star restaurants don't hold a candle to your cooking, Miss Eleanor," he said. Eleanor blushed with pleasure at the compliment, returning to the kitchen to finalize preparations. "Margaret, how are your studies going? I saw your grades from last semester." "Impressive," commented William, sitting at the table. Margaret smiled proudly. "I'm loving the course, especially the subjects on people management and human resources. I think I've finally found my calling," responded Margaret, serving fresh orange juice she had prepared earlier. William accepted the glass gratefully, and she noticed how he seemed more relaxed on these Sundays than in any corporate meeting. "I've been observing your performance at the company too. The implementation of the new cataloging system was brilliant. You have a natural talent for management," he genuinely praised. Margaret felt pride growing in her chest. It wasn't charity or favoritism. She had earned the recognition through her own effort. Eleanor returned from the kitchen carrying the platter with chicken in orange sauce, the aroma filling the entire apartment. "Let's eat while it's hot." "We talk better on a full stomach," she declared with the wisdom of someone who knows that shared meals build stronger bonds than any contract. They sat around the simple but abundant table, William praising every forkful as he always did. "This sauce is even better than last time," he said. Eleanor smiled with satisfaction. During lunch, they talked about everything except the painful past. William told funny stories about corporate situations. Margaret shared curious cases from college. Eleanor spoke about the embroidery orders she had received. It was a normality achieved through much suffering, but precisely because of that more precious. "You know, I was thinking," Eleanor began while serving dessert, the chocolate cake William had brought. "It's been 6 months since all that. It seems like a lifetime," she said thoughtfully. William and Margaret exchanged understanding looks. "It was a lifetime, Mum. We died and were reborn in those days," Margaret responded, holding her mother's hand. William silently agreed, knowing that experience had fundamentally changed all of them. "But look where we are now, together, healthy, happy. Who would have thought?" Eleanor completed with tears of gratitude in her eyes. The moment was interrupted by William's cell phone ringing, but he quickly silenced the device. "Sunday is sacred, business can wait," he declared. The two women smiled, knowing how much this gesture meant. After lunch, while Margaret washed the dishes, insisting that Eleanor rest, William helped dry the plates, a domestic scene that no one in his company would believe if they saw. "I need to tell you some news," he said, putting away the last plate in the cabinet. Margaret and Eleanor looked at him curiously, settling into the small living room. William sat in the armchair that had officially become his during these months of visits, and took a folder from the blazer he had left on the coat rack. "In recent months, I've observed how many families in our company go through situations similar to what you faced. Dedicated employees who cannot adequately care for elderly parents due to lack of resources," he began. Eleanor and Margaret listened attentively, sensing that something important was coming. "That's why I created a special program in the company. Every employee with dependent elderly family members will have access to an extended health plan, including medications, physical therapy, and complete medical monitoring," he announced. Margaret was speechless at the magnitude of the initiative. "William, this must cost the company a fortune," said Margaret, impressed with the generosity of the proposal. William smiled, showing the documents he had brought. "The program has already been operating for 3 months in a testing phase. 43 families have already benefited. Productivity increased 20% because employees no longer need to constantly worry about their parents' health," he explained, showing graphs and numbers. Eleanor's eyes were teary, understanding the impact of this decision. "But the best part," William continued, turning the page of the document, is the name of the program. Margaret and Eleanor leaned in to read, and Eleanor let out an emotional sob when she saw written in large letters, Eleanor Program, caring for those who cared for us. William, I don't know what to say, stammered Eleanor with tears running down her face. William knelt beside her, holding her hands. Your suffering was not in vain, Mrs. Eleanor. It has transformed into hope for dozens of families, he said emotionally. Margaret hugged them both, forming a circle of gratitude and love. We've already received thank you letters from several families, William continued after they composed themselves. A 70-year-old lady got the cataract surgery she had needed for years. A diabetic gentleman now has insulin guaranteed every month. These are stories that remind me why we do this, he said. Eleanor wiped away her tears, her heart overflowing with emotion, knowing that her pain had been transformed into solutions for others. My suffering was worth it then. If other families don't have to go through what we went through, then every moment of agony was worth it, she said with a firm voice. Margaret proudly showed her college report card. Look, I passed all my classes this semester. Some with top marks, she announced. William examined the report card carefully. Strategic management, top grade. Business economics, top grade. Margaret, are you among the best students? He asked, impressed. Margaret blushed but confirmed. Top 5 in the class, she admitted modestly. Eleanor overflowed with maternal pride. My daughter has always been brilliant. She just needed the opportunity, said Eleanor, caressing Margaret's face. Arthur would be so proud of you, my daughter. Wherever he is, I know he's smiling, she added. The mention of Margaret's father brought a moment of respectful silence, everyone remembering the man who, even in absence, still influenced their lives through the values he had left behind. Speaking of opportunities, said William, breaking the silence with a mysterious tone. Margaret, do you know about the company's executive trainee program? He asked casually. Margaret frowned. Of course, it's super competitive. Only 10 spots per year for the entire company. Why? She responded. William smiled enigmatically. Just curious. It's an excellent program. Shapes the future leaders of the company, he said, without elaborating further. Eleanor noticed the playful gleam in his eyes but said nothing. The rest of the afternoon passed in pleasant conversations, laughter, and the peace of being among family. The following week, Margaret was in her office reviewing reports when she received an email from the Human Resources Department that made her freeze. Congratulations! You have been selected for the Executive Trainee Program at Thornton Corporations. She read and reread the message several times, unable to believe it. She rushed to call Eleanor. Mom, I was accepted into the trainee program. But I didn't even apply, she exclaimed, confused. Eleanor laughed on the other end of the line. Oh, my daughter, could it have been William? She suggested. Margaret was silent for a moment, processing. Of course it had been him. The following Sunday, when William arrived for the monthly lunch, Margaret confronted him immediately. You signed me up for the trainee program, she accused, divided between gratitude and indignation. William raised his hands in partial surrender. I merely suggested your name. The selection was entirely based on merit. Your college grades, your exemplary performance at the company, the innovation you brought to the department, he defended himself. Margaret still seemed unsure. But people will say it was favoritism, Margaret argued, her pride fighting against the opportunity. Eleanor intervened with her maternal wisdom. Daughter, do you think people born with silver spoons refuse opportunities out of pride? You deserve this chance. You earned it with your effort. Accepting help from those who want your success is not a demerit, she said firmly. William agreed. Margaret, I personally reviewed all applications. You were among the top 3 candidates. I just made sure your name wasn't ignored due to prejudice about your background, he explained. Margaret finally smiled, accepting the truth in their words. Thank you. I promise you won't regret it, she said with determination. The following Sunday, the apartment was even more lively. Eleanor had prepared rain cakes, the sweet aroma taking over the entire environment. Margaret decorated the table with wildflowers she had bought at the market, and William arrived with a bottle of special imported orange juice. Today we have much to celebrate, announced Eleanor, bringing the tray of golden crispy cakes, Margaret in the trainee program. 6 months of my new life and the family we've built, she said emotionally. They sat around the simple kitchen table, the place where so many tears had been shed, now the setting for genuine joy. William served the juice in glasses that Eleanor had saved for special occasions. A toast, he proposed, raising his glass. To the family we choose, to obstacles overcome, and to the bright future that awaits us, he said. To second chances in life, added Eleanor. To love that transcends blood and obligation, completed Margaret. They toasted, the clinking of glasses echoing through the small apartment. On the wall, the framed medal shone beside family photos, Margaret's father, young Eleanor, and a new picture of the three together. You know, said Eleanor, holding Margaret and William's hands, life took a lot from me. It took my husband, my health, almost my hope. She paused, looking at the two beloved faces before her. But it gave me back twice as much. It gave me a son in William, returned my daughter Margaret stronger than ever, and taught me that family isn't just about blood, it's about choice, about being present in difficult moments and celebrating victories together. Eleanor finished, with tears of happiness streaming down her face. William squeezed her hand, himself emotional. You gave me something all the money in the world couldn't buy, a place where I'm just William, not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a man who found his true family, he confessed. Margaret looked at them both, her heart overflowing with gratitude. I learned that family is chosen and built with love and gratitude, that honor and dignity are worth more than any fortune, that sometimes the universe conspires to bring the right people together at the right time, she said. That Sunday afternoon, in the small apartment they had chosen to keep because it was a home and not just a house, three souls whom destiny had united celebrated not the end of a journey, but the beginning of a new story. A story written not with blood, but with choice, not with obligation, but with love. To our family, they toasted once more, and the future finally smiled upon them. Now tell me in the comments where you're from, and tell me, did you like this story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and check out the next one waiting for you here on screen. See you there.